Do you want to be ahead of the game for the latest in arts, music, cuisine, and entertainment across the Middle East's most dynamic capital cities? Al Monitor is proud to launch our City Pulse newsletters, focused exclusively on local news, starting in Riyadh, Dubai, Istanbul, and Doha. Each week, our on-the-ground writers in these cities cover the latest cultural happenings and trends, so you have everything you need to know for the best local experiences. To subscribe for free, go to almonitor.com, that's al-monitor.com, and sign up on our newsletter page.
Welcome back to the Al Monitor Brief. I'm Adam Lucente. The political change in Syria poses an interesting set of challenges and opportunities for the Gulf, especially the UAE and Saudi Arabia. Both countries had reconciled with the previous administration of President Bashar al-Assad, only to then find him ousted by a rebel offensive in December 2024 and replaced by a transitional authority led by the Islamist group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. The foreign minister of Syria's new government, Asad al-Shibani, visited Abu Dhabi on Monday after his trip to Riyadh last week. The UAE and Saudi Arabia have concerns about Islamism in the region, with Iran also factoring into how they navigate the situation. My guest this week is Al Monitor's Gulf Correspondent Jennifer Gnana. Listen as we delve into the UAE and Saudi Arabia's complex engagement with the new Syrian administration and the interesting regional dynamics at play. Hope you enjoy. Jennifer, welcome back to the Al Monitor Brief.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us at this critical time. So, first question is, you wrote recently about this. What are the reasons Saudi Arabia is reaching out to the new Syrian authorities?
Saudi Arabia, as you know, is the most important country in the Middle East in terms of its size. It's the largest economy in the region. It's a political heavyweight. And in the vacuum that's been left by Iran's crumbling axis of resistance, Saudi Arabia sees a bigger role to play in the region. And it was also, there was some Saudi initiative, but equally the new Syrian government is also willing to change the way it sees its place in the Middle East. It wants to move away from Iranian influence. And the most logical way to move away from Iran is to develop closer ties with Saudi Arabia. And we've seen some meetings between Syrian and Saudi officials. The first foreign visit by the newly appointed Syrian foreign minister, Asad Shibani, was to Riyadh, which was, very telling in terms of how Syria sees itself and who it wants to engage with in the region.
And how much are concerns about Islamism as a political force? How much is that driving Saudi Arabia's engagement?
I think Saudi Arabia, as well as other Gulf states, are very much concerned with Islamism. They're really concerned about, revolutions being exported across the Middle East. They are concerned about very charismatic leaders inspiring the youth to radicalize or to take up positions. So all of these are immediate concerns, and the region is going through a very challenging time. The regime change was one among many things happening in the Middle East. There is the war in Gaza, which has mobilized a lot of people in the Middle East. The sentiment in the Arab street has changed over the last 2 years. So it is a very critical time for Saudi Arabia to be more proactive in engaging with any new changes happening in the Middle East. And if they are able to influence in any way in terms of governance, in terms of direction, through either supporting the leadership, providing aid, or just generally guidance, I think they'll be willing to take that bet.
Pivoting now to the UAE, they were obviously one of the first countries in the region to kind of reach out and reconcile with Assad. How do they view his fall, and how do they view this new government in Syria?
The UAE has been approaching this very differently. So if we just track the movements of Asad Shibani, the new Syrian foreign minister, he went to Riyadh, and then he made a stop in Doha, and then he reached Abu Dhabi. And of the three countries, the UAE is the most cautious when it comes to the changes happening in Syria. Just days before Assad fell, there were reports that the UAE was in talks with the US to provide some sort of sanctions relief to Bashar al-Assad in exchange for him moving away from Iran and coming closer to the Arab fold. The UAE was very instrumental in helping Assad rehabilitate himself among the Arab countries. If you remember, he was expelled. Syria was expelled from the Arab League following the 2011 uprising and his brutal crackdown. So the UAE was very much instrumental in helping him come back into the fold, but it was a little too late. Things moved very quickly, and within days, Aleppo fell, and then Damascus fell. And even as the rebel troops who are now in government were approaching Damascus, the UAE president had conversations with Assad. The UAE foreign minister held talks with a number of regional foreign ministers. So they were still trying to make sure that the old regime could maybe survive, whereas other countries in the region were quicker to maneuver, quicker to change. I was actually in Doha for the Doha Forum when Assad's regime fell, and it was really interesting to see the contrast in Doha. You could see that the foreign ministry was readying itself for change. You could see that they were already preparing for a post-Assad, a transitional government. There were talks about opening up an embassy, whereas the UAE was slower to embrace change. And the other thing that we've noticed is, after Qatar, we've had Saudi Arabia establishing an air bridge and also considering a land bridge, which would include transfer of fuel, which is to replace Iranian fuel supplies to Syria. And Qatar has also sent across some aid deliveries. We haven't really seen the UAE match these efforts. And this is unusual because the UAE is very proactive when it comes to humanitarian aid across the region and across the world. So they're still waiting to see, but they did receive the new Syrian foreign minister, and they did say that they support Syria's new transitional government, the aspirations of the Syrian people. But in terms of committing funds into Syria, I think we can see them following the steps of the other GCC countries. But there's also a bit of GCC consensus, so it's unlikely that the UAE will stay away, but they will likely remain more cautious than Saudi Arabia or Qatar.
Stay tuned for more of our conversation with Gulf Correspondent Jennifer Gnana after this short break.
Today's transformation of the Middle East is at the center of global geopolitics. Whether you're an analyst, diplomat, executive, or academic, you need the best reporting and analysis to understand what's really happening on the ground and what it means for the world. Al-Monitor is the award-winning independent leader in Middle East news. From Riyadh to Beirut, Abu Dhabi to Doha, and Baghdad to Tehran, our team of over 100 expert journalists report daily on the top stories driving the regional trends. Download our mobile app and subscribe to Al-Monitor to follow what leaders and decision makers are reading every day. Go to almonitor.com, that's AL-MONITOR.com, and use promo code POD25, POD25 for a discount.
Okay, we're back with Jennifer. That actually is a good bridge to, the final question. You mentioned the humanitarian aspect. What role do you think, or do people in the region think that Gulf states might play in, this post-Assad Syria? Will it be mostly humanitarian for now, or do you think it could, develop into more robust economic relations? What role might they play, and what are we seeing so far?
I think for now, humanitarian aid is a priority. Winters in Syria can get really harsh, and this is a perfect time for Gulf states to slowly go back into Syria and play a critical role in meeting immediate humanitarian necessities. And after that, I think they will play a very critical role in rebuilding Syria. There have been some estimates, it's supposed to take around 250 to 400 billion to rebuild Syria. So these are big amounts. And if you remember, Syria still remains under a number of US and EU sanctions. And one of the reasons why the Syrian foreign minister was in the Gulf states was to get some support from regional countries to remove some of the sanctions so that Syria could come back into the international financial system and back into the regional and international fold. And in this scenario, it makes more sense for regional countries to be getting back into rebuilding infrastructure. Syria has been cut off from the world for about 13 years. And even before that, it had very challenging relationships with the rest of the world as long as Assad's family was in power. I mean, Syria has other needs in terms of energy supplies, being cut off from Iran. It would need energy supplies from the Gulf states. If there's a land bridge, I believe Saudi Arabia would be willing to ensure that Syria gets fuel supplies. There's also a refinery that needs to be rebuilt. So there are many infrastructure projects, and the Gulf countries, and also Ahmed al-Shara, the leader of HTS, mentioned that he specifically wanted Gulf countries to play a big role when it comes to rebuilding Syria. So I think it's both the ambition of the new Syrian government, and there is some willingness on part of the Gulf states to do something in Syria.
Thank you, Jennifer, for all these insights, and we look forward to more of your reporting on this.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the Al Monitor Brief. Follow Al Monitor for more on the news impacting the region.